Hello, my name is Edward Anderson, and today I am going to be taking you through the very basics of the heart of supply chain operations management. That is one of the hearts, which is the basics of inventory, why we use it, and how we use it. So let's get started. Inventory management is crucially important to operations management and particularly that of supply chains. And what I would like you to walk away from this module is that you'll understand some of the pros and cons of inventory. And then based on those pros and cons, how large an inventory do you require? And then discuss how that leads to essentially a hedge or a real option, as it's sometimes called, with safety stock. That is, we order more than we expect to need. And why would we do that, and what are the implications? So why do we need inventory in the first place? Well, there are a couple of reasons for it, but basically it comes down to variability, and in particular, dealing with variability in demand. Whether you're selling airplane tickets, or you're selling concert tickets, or you're selling automobiles, or having rooms in a hospital, these are all a form of inventory. Things that customers come in, and then we either have them or we don't. And so we have that demand variability, but also we end up in situations too where, particularly if we're in the middle of a supply chain, we may not just have to worry about the consumer on this side having variability in their demand. That's going to happen an awful lot. But occasionally we have to worry about supply as well. And in that case, inventory can be a help as well to protect against that variability. This has actually been successfully used by a number of firms to cope with COVID and other disruptions. Now, what we do effectively with an inventory is we create a buffer that will protect us against demand. Now, the question is how big do we really want that buffer to be? Do we want it to have the just enough to meet expected demand, or do we want to be able to deal with a situation by having extra inventory on hand if demand is higher than expected? And if we have that extra hedge, that's what's called a safety stock. But it costs money. Inventory in general costs money. So we really don't want more of it than we need. And so that leads us to this whole branch of supply chain operations management that's called inventory theory. And we don't need to get into the depths of that, but it would be good for us to look at the basics. And that's what we'll start out with today. Now, with respect to costs, the costs that determine how much inventory you should have, we need to balance a number of them. One is that having goods on hand is just plain expensive by itself. And it also affects the profit that we get from selling that inventory to a consumer. And hence, if the variable cost is higher, all other things equal, we're going to want to have less inventory because we won't make as much profit on that particular good. There are holding costs. Some products go stale with time, others tie up money. For instance, if you have $1 million in inventory that's $1 million you can't spend on anything else. And if you don't need that inventory, then that cost is quite expensive. Also, you have to warehouse your inventory. And it also tends to promote defects and inventory. If there's a lot of it around, a lot of times it'll disappear through shrinkage, which is essentially shoplifting or embezzlement. And then we have to deal with clearance costs as well. That is, if we have too much inventory relative to demand, then we're going to lose money when we have to dispose of that inventory. And that can take a number of forms. Maybe we can do a fire sale. Or we may have to dispose of the inventory completely, in which case clearance costs eat up everything that we purchased. Now, on the other hand, we have all those costs for holding inventory and having too much inventory, to that of not having enough on hand, which is primarily the form of lost sales. Because if we don't have a good on hand when a customer doesn't want to come and buy it, then what we don't have is we will not get a profit from it. And if you think about profit minus cost of a good that's been purchased to go in your inventory, that's an opportunity cost. That's a lost sale. There's a longer term cost as well. If a customer comes into a store and can't find our product, it will eventually lead, if it happens enough times, to the customer not coming back to our store, perhaps. And hence, we're going to lose their future business. And so there's something called a goodwill cost, which is really the cost of alienating customers and is calculated, roughly speaking, as the net present value of the loss of future business. And that is separate from that lost sales cost I just talked about. Before we begin, some definitions. There's something called a stock out, and that occurs when we run out of inventory, also called a stock, and cannot satisfy customer demand. Whether we are not able to satisfy one customer or 100 customers, it's still a stock out. We just don't have enough inventory. And it's a binary thing. We either have enough or we don't. The service level is the odds or the probability that we do not stock out. That is, we satisfy every customer who comes in the door. And if you think of it that way, if we have a 70% service level, that means that we have a 70% chance of satisfying everybody who comes into our location. And we have 100% minus 70% equals 30%, a 30% chance of stocking out. And in fact, the service level is always going to be 100% minus the probability of stocking out. Lastly, there's the order quantity, and that is how much that we order in a given cycle, the number of products we want. It is usually got an abbreviation of Q. And so later on, when I talk about Q and the order quantity, realize it's the amount that we order during this cycle. Now, let me go more into the concept of safety stock. If we want to match, in some sense, our order quantity to most often be the same as demand, we would set the service level to 50%. But the thing is, in many cases, we actually have set a service level that's higher than 50%. So it means on average, we're going to end up with inventory that has to be cleared or otherwise disposed of at the end of the inventory cycle we're looking at. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is that it costs us money to store inventory, but in many cases, the loss of economic profit, the opportunity cost of that lost sale, plus the goodwill cost of alienating customers is higher. And so we end up in most situations, not all, where on average, we're going to have leftover inventory at the end of the inventory cycle. And that's called the safety stock. And the safety stock, if you want a formula for it, it's the actual order quantity that you place minus the order quantity you would need for a service level of 50%. And as I probably mentioned before, but I will bring it up, it is a safety stock is essentially a hedge against unanticipated demand. Also, if you know anything about it, is financial theory. It's essentially an option. So if more demand shows up, we've paid a little money down to execute the option to sell that product and make money off of it. And that is called, in operations management, a real option. Now, if you're not interested in financial theory, you can just forget about that. But if you are, there's the linkage. So we're going to concentrate in this particular module solely upon a one-time inventory decision. Say you're at the beginning of a fashion season and you go to only place one order for goods and one order only. You cannot reorder. Or you have a certain number of airplane tickets, or you have a certain number of hotel rooms. So there's actually a goods and a services component. The thing is, as we were talking about earlier, we don't want to have too many of them because that's expensive in terms of holding costs and cost of capital and so on. But we don't want it too low because of customer costs as well. So how do we balance these? One that is often used is really simple. Operations managers just set an arbitrary service level, say 90%, 95%. Those seem to be the most common ones in practice. So let's try this out. McCormick Hardware orders lawnmowers each May, and they only order once. They can't reorder. The lawnmowers being purchased this year cost $300 and sell for $425. In the past, McCormick has always been able to sell all of its surplus during its fall end-of-year sale. The sales price for any surplus lawnmowers this year is $250. If the following probability distribution for demand has been observed in the past, how many lawnmowers should be ordered if we want a service level of 90%? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through all of these levels here, and we're going to calculate them by summing the probabilities here. And so let's do that. First of all, we've got about a 10% chance that we'll sell nothing. So the service level is again, the odds that we're going to have enough inventory on hand to take care of everyone who comes in. Now, the thing is, if we set our service level at 1, then what will happen is our probability is that we'll be able to take care of everybody with a 0.10% probability. Now, if we, on the other hand, set our order quantity to 1, well, service level would be, well, if one person comes in, we're okay. If 2 customers come in, we're okay. No, excuse me. If 1 customer comes in, we're okay. If no customers come in, we're okay. So if we look at the odds of that, 0.15 plus 0.10, that means our service level is 25%. That means we've got a 25% chance of having enough lawnmowers on hand to satisfy all customers and our stock out and not stock out. By the way, that would also imply that our probability of stocking out would be 75%. Okay, so if we have 2 lawnmowers on hand that we order, then our probability of taking care of 2 customers if they come in, or 1 customer, or 0 customers, we've got a 55% chance of satisfying everyone who comes in. And we can proceed likewise. 3, if we order, is going to give us a 75% service level. 4 would be 0.9%. And then it's always going to be 5 or less. So we've got a 100% chance of achieving that. So there it is in a more pretty form. So if our service level is 90%, which, as a reminder, there's only a 10% probability of stocking out in that case, how much do we want to order? What's our order quantity, our Q? Well, let's take a look. Let's go back here. So if we look at the service levels that for a given Q, then we want 90%. Well, that's 90%. We're going to need a service level of 90%. That corresponds to a demand of 4. So we've got to order 4 lawnmowers. So we order 4 lawnmowers. Now, interestingly enough, that's really more than we need at some level. If we had a service level of 50%, we would be matching demand in some sense. We'd be most likely to match demand. But we are ordering 4 at a 90% service level. Now, okay, what's the service level of 50%? So we'd have a 50-50 chance of hitting, of satisfying customers. Well, there is no 50% here, but 0.55 is close. It's close enough for our purposes, given that we only have a choice between 1, 2, or 3, for example. So if we do that, then our safety stock equals 4 lawnmowers, which is what we actually order, minus 3. And hence, our safety stock is 1 lawnmower. So what that means is we have an extra lawnmower over what we think are most likely the service level that would take care of us on average. So think of that 1 lawnmower as a hedge or an option to be exercised should enough customers come in. Now, generally speaking, when we're looking at inventory, we're looking at a much greater demand than what I just showed. So in that case, we end up in situations where we often have normal distributions. So the normal distribution, as you may remember, is something that looks like a bell and is often called a bell curve. Now, let's look at an example where there's so many goods, so much demand potentially that we do have a normal distribution. So a retail outlet store sells bathing suits for $10 each. Assume each customer only buys one suit, just to keep this straightforward. The cost of the store is $8 per suit. So that's what we pay to our supplier. All suits not sold during the fall season are sold for half price in an end of season clearance sale. Because they are on clearance, we assume a goodwill cost of $0. Demand for the suits has historically been normally distributed with a mean of 500 and a standard deviation of 100. Okay, so how do we find this? Well, first of all, we need to know what the service level is. And then for any given service level, if our demand is normally distributed, we can calculate a z-score. And a z-score is the number of standard deviations above the mean that will correspond to 90%. And for any normal distribution, doesn't matter what its mean or standard deviation is, that z-score will be the same. So there are a couple ways to get the z-score. As I said, it's a number of standard deviations above the mean, so you can figure out in Excel. The other way to do it is to use something that's called a z-chart, which is here. And what we have is along this column, we have z's. And then along this column, we have probabilities. And so what we do in this particular case is we're going to look for this probability here, which is our service level. You can see that down here. And let's see, what's 70%, or excuse me, 90%. I don't see 90% here. So we keep on going through. I don't see 90% yet. I don't see it here. Oh, here it is. So we got 90% service level, and that corresponds to 1.28 standard deviations above the mean. So our order quantity is the mean plus z times the standard deviation. Which in our case is 500 plus 1.28 standard deviations above the mean times our standard deviation is 100. So it comes out to 628 lawnmowers. So that's how many we order. Now, that also implies that our safety stock is going to be 628 mowers minus what a service level of 50 would be, which in this case is going to be the mean, or 500. And that's going to give us a total of 128 mowers. So that's our safety stock. That'll protect us against unexpectedly large orders. And that's all there is to it. Now, You will notice, however, that in both those examples, there were a number of costs that were given, but we didn't use them. What would happen if we decided to use those numbers to actually give us a cost, or excuse me, use those costs to give us a service level? So instead of figuring out arbitrarily, we'll figure out the service level that will give us the optimal profit given those cost numbers. Well, let's see how we would go about that. The way this is dealt with is there's something called a news vendor formula. And that is because this problem of how much we should order, given that we know all the costs, is called the news vendor cost. And the reason it is named that is when the problem was first formulated, the example was given is if you've got a newsstand, how many copies of a newspaper would the person who's running the newsstand actually buy? Because if they buy too many, turns into waste paper, the extra ones. And if they buy too few, again, they alienate their customers or they don't make a sale. So now we want to optimize this trade-off of too high versus too low. So how do we do that? What we do is we find the point where the expected cost of stocking one additional unit equals the expected cost of losing a sale from not stocking that unit. Okay. Now, when we say expected cost, realize that that cost is going to be whatever the cost of having one too high is, if there is one too high. But then we have to multiply it by the odds that you will have one too many, at least one too many, actually. And similarly for understocking. So we want to find that perfect point where if we add another item of inventory, it does us no good. So it costs us X to buy it, but the expect profit's going to be X as well. So we're going to reach that point, that average point, go no further. This is a lot like economics. If you ever looked at in economics, if you ever take that class, they'll talk about something called marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And that's exactly what we're doing right here. Okay, so let's look at the news vendor formula. Where does it come from? Well, we assume that there's a random demand, and we're going to call that D. And the mean of that, actually, it's not the mean, excuse me. There's a random demand, which we'll call D. There's a unit selling price to the customer. That is what we would charge a customer. Like on those bathing suits, somebody comes into our store, that's what we charge them. That's the price, or P. C on this side is how much it costs us to buy that inventory initially. Also, though it usually is not expressed this in the news vendor formula, it would actually also include that C should also include the holding cost. So just remember that it would include the holding cost as well. And then G is the unit of cost of loss of goodwill from a shortage. Like I said earlier, effectively what that is the net present value of the loss of future sales because you have stocked out. V is the salvage value for the product. So if you end up with it at the end of the season, how much can you get for it? And then we define the cost of overstocking a unit and the cost of understocking a unit. So this is C minus V. That's the cost of overstocking a unit because that's the that is the cost of buying that product and what you get from salvaging it at the end. Note again, C includes a holding cost. If it's significant. Okay. And then there's the cost of understocking unit, and that is the loss of our potential profit plus the goodwill cost. And so what we want to do is, first of all, let's calculate the expected marginal opportunity cost of understocking. Sometimes it's called the underage cost. And what we do here is, well, it's the cost of understocking 1 unit times the probability of understocking. And the costs or marginal risk, the expected marginal risk cost from overstocking, also called the overage cost, is CU times the probability of overstocking. And I'm not going to write out every letter. You get the idea. So now what we really want to know is we want to know the service level. And the service level is actually our odds of overstocking. And of course, everybody asks me, well, does overstocking, what happens if you get exactly the right number? Well, strictly speaking, we count if you have exactly, or the quantity that's exactly equal to how many customers come in, we consider that part of overstocking. So to get that, we need to do a little transformation. This is not a big one, but you may remember when you're looking at probabilities that 2 binary probabilities, when one has to occur or the other, are going to add up to 1. And so the probability of understocking is the same thing as the probability of overstocking. Okay, and then we can do some algebra, and what will happen is we want to find the Q such that the probability of overstocking which is the service level, equals cost of understocking a unit over the cost of understocking a unit plus the cost of overstocking a unit. And so, of course, you can use this formula without understanding where it comes from, but I wanted to show you that there is nothing up my sleeves. There's nothing magical. And you may end up in a situation that's a little more complicated than this, in which case you want to understand that you're balancing marginal costs. So there it is in a prettier form. And now what we're going to do is apply it to our 2 examples that we had before. One was the lawnmower example. And again, it's not nebulizers, it's lawnmower. But as a reminder, we have all those costs up there. And I'll just write down what they are. So what do we have? We've got our price is $425. Our cost is $300. Our salvage value, because it was half off, is $250. Our goodwill cost, I don't say anything about it. So we're going to set to 0 because of the, it's a clearance. They're going to have a clearance sale at the end. This is a one-time thing, and it's thought that it doesn't have much of an effect. What I would say, though, is if you ever deal with a firm and they want to do this sort of analysis, you have to ask them, what is your goodwill cost? I'm not talking about the cost of one lost sale, but what is the cost of not having that product possibly turning into, on average, lost sales in the future? You need to know that. Now, the only people who are really going to be able to tell you that are the marketing research folks. And so, like many other things else in supply chain operations management, to do supply chain operations management well, you have to do your market research well, and you have to have a tight relationship with marketing. So, okay, we've got those 4 costs, and then we calculate the cost of understocking, which is P minus C plus G, which is equal to $425 minus 300 plus 0 equals 125. Cost of overstocking equals C minus V. And that's equal to 300 less 250. And hence, optimal service level, which oftentimes is denoted by a star or asterisk next to it, is equal to, well, CU over CU plus CO, which is equal to 125 over 125 plus 50, and that's equal to 71.4%. Okay, so we now know what our optimal service level is. Let's see how many we should order. So we'll go back and look at these service levels. And there is no 71.4%. So we'll just go with the closest one. And then if we do that, as a reminder, that means 3. So that means our order quantity is 3. And that means our safety stock is going to be 3 minus 2 equals 1. Now, as a reminder, when we had the 90% service level, that was equal to 90% service level had us have a Q of 4. And again, 50% service level would be 2, or as close as we're going to get. So there's a safety stock of 2 lawnmowers in that case. And there's 1 here. So what's happening is because what's happened is that essentially by picking 90% service level, we have imputed a fairly high goodwill cost. because that is the only variable which was not fixed. Price is the price, cost is the cost, the salvage value is the salvage value. So the one thing we don't really know is the goodwill cost. And what happens is that firms assume that that goodwill cost effectively, when they pick 90% or even 95% for their service levels arbitrarily, is very high. So when you talk to marketing, if they come back with something that gives you a service level of 70% or what have you, push on the marketing people and make sure that they're not missing something, because there's a reason why those arbitrary service levels are high. So in any case, though, we've got that arbitrary service level, and assuming that we have our costs right, if it really is zero goodwill cost, yeah, 71.4% is where we should be. So we are overestimating. Okay. So let's go back to that normal distribution example where we had bathing suits. And we're going to do the same thing as we did in the past, except we're actually going to base our service levels off of costs, and that will influence the order quantity. And if we do that, okay, our price equal 10, our cost that we pay to our supplier is 8, our salvage value is 50% times 10, which equals 5. And according to this up here, it's assuming that the goodwill cost is 0. Okay, marketing has spoken. So let's go with that. So goodwill equals 0. And if we do that, our overage cost is going to be 8 minus 5 equals 3. Our underage cost equals 10 minus 8 plus 0, which is 2. So our service level is going to be 2 over 2 plus 3, or 40%. Now that's kind of interesting because we've just decided that if the expected or average number in some sense, it's really a median, but comes in, that what we're going to do is we're going to stock out. So if that average number comes in here, we're going to stock out. This is kind of a rare thing. The reason is because you have to have a relatively low margin business. So the P minus C has to be pretty tight. And then the goodwill cost also has to be very low. But you do see situations like this. For example, in an outlet store. Think of an outlet store. You don't really expect to get everything there, and you'll probably go back anyway. So the cost of customer alienation is small. Okay, so let's calculate what the actual order quantity would be. Well, service level of 40% implies a Z of, let's go back to our Z chart. So 40%, well, it's 38.7, 40.52. Okay. There we are, minus 0.24. Now, what that means is, remember, Z is the number of standard deviations above the mean. So you get minus 0.24, it's going to be minus 0.24 standard deviations above the mean, which means 0.24 standard deviations below the mean. So let's go back here. That means Z equals 0.24, but it's negative. And so the order quantity we want is going to be, in this case, it's going to be 500 plus minus 0.24 times 100, which equals 476. Now, you'll note that 476, that's our answer, by the way. Now, let's put the service level here. You'll notice also that 476 is less than 500, right? So that means there is no safety stock. Okay. Now, we also want to know the probability of stocking out. This is trivial. The probability of a stock out is going to be equal to 1 minus the service level. And hence, in this case, it's going to be 1 minus 40% equals 60%. Okay. Now, we're interested in what would happen if the marketing department comes back and tells us the goodwill cost is $3. Well, let's do that. That means that the cost of understocking is equal to 10 minus 8 plus 3. So it's equal to $5 a suit. Cost of overstocking is the same as it was, which is $3. And hence our service level is going to be 5 over 5 plus 3 equals 62.5%. So there we are. And that implies that Z is going to be equal to 0.32. And it's plus this time. So that means that our Q equals 500 plus 0.32 times 100 okay. Which equals, let's just confirm that. So 62.5%, yeah, it's 0.32. Just double checking. And so that equals 632. Excuse me, it's not 632. Apologies. 532. So now we are indeed going to have a safety stock, and the safety stock will be equal to, well, it's 532, which is what we ordered. 500 would be a service level of 50%, and hence we got a safety stock of 32 suits. As a recap, the news vendor formula, service level, which is the probability that we demand is going to be less than the order, less than or equal to the quantity that we order, i.e. the probability of overstocking. It's equal to CU over CU plus CO. So, takeaways from today. Probably the most important one is the goodwill cost idea. You need to really calculate it if you're going to do the news vendor. A lot of companies assume that it's just zero. And in fact, you'll see that in a lot of textbooks, but odds are it is nowhere near zero. And so, with respect to that, you really need to talk to your marketing department if you're going to do your inventory management properly. So, with that, at this point, you'll know the pros and cons of having inventory on hand. You'll have a good idea of how to right size inventory to the level that you need. And you'll understand why we have these safety stocks, which are higher than what a 50-50 chance of satisfying our customers would be. So with that, I thank you. And we will meet in the future. With that, take care.